Welcome to part 2 of the Tarsacci MDT 8000 Basic Training video series. We're still working on the fundamentals, but we're going to get more into the details starting with this video. In this video, we'll cover some basics about target ID that will apply to almost all metal detectors. Hope you're enjoying this training video series and that you will continue watching. Let's start out with the numerical target ID display. First off, I'd like to say that the Tarsacci ID is always displayed, unless you're in pinpoint mode, which we'll discuss later. To make sure we're on the same page, the target ID is displayed in the center of the screen on the Tarsacci. As you see here, it's showing a target ID of -11. Here's a simple chart that represents the display scale. Non-ferrous targets show up as positive numbers from 0 to +30, while ferrous targets show up as negative numbers from -30 to 0. At least they do in theory. There are exceptions. Basically, the lower the conductivity of the target, the lower the target ID. And of course, the higher the conductivity of the target, the higher the target ID. The target ID is a function of many factors. We'll try to cover many of them now. This description is a little more descriptive than the one given in the owner's manual. First is the target shape. Of course, there's an infinite number of shapes. Let's look at a few examples. Many of them will have a scale to give you an idea of the size. The first is a round target. I'm sure you're all familiar with these. Next, we've got a cross. Here's a barrel band with 2 open areas. Now we've got a large chain with many links. Now let's look at some examples of different size targets. First, we've got a percussion cap. They're very small. Now we've got a small ring. Here's a smoothing iron. It is much larger than a solid iron. Now this is a mowing scythe. It's very large. The orientation of the target can make a huge difference as well. Let's look at a walking liberty half first. Laying flat will give you the best signal. When it's laying at about a 45-degree angle, there will be some difference. When it's vertical, it's much harder to get a good ID. Here's a wagon wheel hub side view and profile view. This simple bracket with rivets from 2 views. Now a big old axe head. There's a lot of difference in surface area depending on how it's laying. The purity of the metal can make a huge difference. Here's a silver Franklin half. Now we're looking at a watch fob made of brass. Here's a copper large cent. Here's a 14-karat gold wedding band. Target IDs can vary significantly depending on the purity of the metal. Many metal objects, especially jewelry and coins, can contain many different alloys of metal. Here's a ring that probably contains several different alloys. Now we've got an Indian head cent in which the alloy varies according to the year it was minted. This Virginia button is made of brass which contains copper and zinc and was gold plated. Corrosion plays a huge part in the target ID, especially with iron targets. Here's a cowbell that looked hopeless when I found it. It was just a gob of rust. It cleaned up pretty good. Next we've got a pocket knife. This one is in pretty bad shape. This old spoon has seen better days as well, either from wear and tear or corrosion. Now take a look at this curry comb. Not much left. Adjacent targets all under your coil at the same time can really confuse the best detector. First one is a standard Liberty quarter that would probably be missed due to the nails. The target I would do not read the same as a quarter by itself. Then we've got a silver bracelet beside of a pull tab, a high conductor and a low conductor together. The signal would probably read an average of the 2 targets on most detectors. What if you came across 3 coins all made from different materials and different sizes? What do you think a detector would read on this one? Last, we've got a very unlikely situation of a heavy iron chain with multiple targets adjacent to it. Between the iron, 69 caliber bullet, block eye button, large cent, and buck and ball, what do you think you'd get for a target ID? Either the iron would mask the non-ferrous target or you'd get a very confusing target ID. There's definitely a lot of targets laying in the ground close together on many sites that will remain there until someone digs all the targets, or until some new technology comes out. The depth of the target definitely makes a huge difference in the target ID. Here's a few examples of different depths. These bullets were found going mostly by the tones. The target ID varied considerably from what a bullet would read in an air test. See that one in the bottom of the hole? It's probably 6 inches, 5.5 or 6 inches. Can you see the base of that one down there? That's a solid 8 inches. See that one still sticking in the bank? I'd call that right at 11 inches. Here's a few other factors that can affect the target ID. The soil mineralization plays a huge part in not only how deep you can detect the target, and how accurately you can identify it. Here's a brief definition of mineralized soil. Ground mineralization is the amount of magnetism in the soil due to particles in the soil having the characteristics of metal and produce a magnetic response picked up by a metal detector. Old soil exposed to surface conditions for a long period of time are most often highly mineralized. Highly mineralized soil is typically red or reddish in color, but not always. Ground balancing your detector will allow it to perform better and give a deeper and more accurate target ID of what is in the ground. By the way, the ground balance number does not equate to how mineralized the soil is on a given site. Some metal detectors have the ability to analyze the ground mineralization, but not many. The first thing that gets affected when you're detecting in mineralized ground is the depth at which a signal gives a reliable target ID. Detector sounds or tones will function a little deeper. VLF detectors have a tough time with mineralized soil, while pulse detectors deal with it very well. The Tarsacci MDT 8000 is designed to work in these hot, complex soil and does a very good job at it. This red clay soil is very hot and will mask most targets from a VLF detector at or around 5 to 6 inches. This soil is red, but it's not nearly as mineralized as the last one we looked at. You can typically get a good signal 6 to 8 inches deep with a VLF detector. Now we've got some dark soil. Do you think it's mineralized? Actually, it's very hot or mineralized in pockets. It's hard to get a good signal with a VLF detector in this soil. It's a hit or miss situation. Pulse detectors handle most of this ground very well, including the Tarsacci. Believe it or not, but the detector frequency affects the target ID as well. Let's look at some examples using the Tarsacci MDT 8000. This CSA belt plate shows a target ID of 22 at 6.4 kHz, 23 at 9 kHz, 24 at 12 kHz, and 25 at 15 kHz. This Walking Liberty half shows a target ID of 23 at 6.4 kHz, 25 at 9 kHz, 26 at 12 kHz, and 26 at 15 kHz. So you see the frequency does make a slight difference. In many instances, the direction of your search coil swing can make a difference. It may be two or more targets adjacent to each other or an odd-shaped target. Here's just one example I tested before with a Franklin $half and a square nail. When the nail is perpendicular to the center of your search coil, you get a target ID of -24. When the nail is parallel to the center of the search coil, you get a target ID of +22. Here's an example with a double bit axe head. This also demonstrates a ferrous target given a non-ferrous signal. When the axe head is perpendicular to the center of your search coil, you get a target ID of -21. When the axe head is parallel to the center of your search coil, you get a target ID of +25. That's why it's important to search a site from different directions if a lot of targets are present. I'm sure there's many other factors that influence the target ID, so make sure you're not missing the find of a lifetime by trusting the target ID or VDI numbers too much. In a nutshell, the target ID is just an estimate based on many factors. This is true for all detectors. Here's a few more tidbits of information you should know. If the detector does not receive a strong signal, the target ID may jump around. If the target is shallow, you may get multiple tones, more than you expected. Here's an image I put together of some of the finds I've made over the years with many different metal detectors. These targets hit all over the target ID scale, with many of them sharing a target ID number. How many of these items can you identify? Pause the video and look them over and think of the other detectors you may use or have used in the past. How many of these do you think you could have identified based on target ID alone? Or let me put it like this: if I buried these relics at various depths and you didn't even have a clue as to what type of targets I had buried, do you think you could identify most, if any of them? Now add in all the cans, can fragments, bottle caps, hot rocks, rusty nails, wagon parts, horse tack, household items, hinges, doorknobs, wires, electrical components, etc. What I'm trying to say is that there's a lot involved when it comes to trying to identify an unknown object based solely on the target ID. Don't let this scare you. It's just a part of detecting. You have to learn how to make your best educated guess based on the information you receive from your detector. Typically, VLF, very low frequency detectors, do a much better job at this than, say, a pulse detector. Well, this is where the Tarsacci shines with its mixed domain technology. It tries to give pulse detector depths with VLF detector target analysis, the best of both worlds. That's what led me to the Tarsacci. I was wanting a pulse detector that I could use on the sites that had the complex ground that usually defeated VLF detectors. The Tarsacci came along at almost half the price of a high-end pulse detector, but still lightweight, like some of the newer VLF detectors. The Tarsacci MDT 8000 definitely does a great job of separating the first signals from the non-first signals, but the tones will hang in there much deeper. As with most detectors, I depend more on the tones than I do the target ID. Well, now you should have a good understanding of the many factors involved in trying to identify a target while it's still in the ground. Long ago, I came to the understanding that no machine alone is going to tell you what's in the ground. You have to rely a lot on your experience and gut feeling and a thorough understanding of your detector. On the next video, we're going to go over how the tones relate to the target ID. This is a very important part of understanding what's under the coil. I hope you enjoy the video and that you'll continue watching the rest of the series. If you like my videos, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Saving Local History. Your support will help me stay motivated. Thanks for watching.